very good the group of people coming here. So for Professor Benton, which we invited a few months ago. We are very happy to have him today lecturing here to the public of master students, which probably I've never met him, so the first time I'm going to say something about his background, which may help you also to contextualize better his work and the things that he will say to us today. Okay, so and also I've indicated to Marta Rossi and then Jeanneret should have circulated some link about Tim Benton with an interview to Tim Benton concerning his former work as responsible of a course that was held by at the Open University in Kiev, which has been a co-founder and responsible for some years between 1975 and 1982, I think, no? 81. So please look at that link because I think it should be very useful. I mean, it's useful for you in order to produce materials that we're required to produce after this lecture. Anyway, the lecture will be, in fact, on a totally different topic from this former work, but it's still a continuation of the long work of architectural historian that Tim Benton has been carrying on. Anyway, so although our guest doesn't really need any kind of introduction, I would like to briefly recollect a few tracks of his itinerary as a scholar, especially for the use of the youngest scholar among us. Tim Benton is British. He's not an architect by education, he's an architectural historian. In a recent interview that he has released that I've been watching yesterday, he has said that he came to architectural history and to the love of architecture from two different directions, two opposite directions. First of all, his degree that he obtained at Cambridge University was in history and art history. And on the other hand, he also had become a photographer even before graduating. So already before graduating, he was a photographer. So while he was a student, he also published two books about architecture in Italy. One was on Sicilian Baroque architecture and the other on Napolitan Baroque architecture, but as a photographer. So he provided all the documentation, photographic documentation of these two books, whose texts were actually authored by, not by Tim Benton, but by an art historian, architecture historian, very important within the historiography of art and architecture, was called Anthony Blunt, actually Sir Anthony Blunt, no? Who had been at the time the director of the court of the Institute of Art, one of the prestigious institutions for the study of the history of art in London. And also, some of you maybe are acquainted or are aware of what this Anthony Blunt is, because I suppose that all of us have seen the very famous series of The Crown, where Anthony Blunt is featured as a character, also keeper of the Queen's painting, by the way, and also Russian Spy. Many things are at the same time. Anyway, so Benton has always cultivated this double interest at once visual in architecture, but also historical, of course, long architecture, long taking photographs, but above all, being an historian. So working in archives, working with documents, and also, as he said in this interview, focusing on very narrow topics, very narrow inquiries. That's very interesting as well. So the starting point must have been a book he wrote in 1984, which was in French, called Les Villas Parisiennes de Corbusier et Jeanneret, 1920 to 1930, which has since been reissued and translated in many languages. So on the villa of Le Corbusier between the 20s and the 20s until 1930. And since then, he has worked a lot on Le Corbusier, becoming an expert on the Swiss French architect, but starting very early, in fact. And we say with an Italian expression, saying Campino Sospetti, which I don't know whether it can be translated into English, but at the time when the archive that was at the Fondation of Le Corbusier, that Le Corbusier had wanted to establish, and was established three years after his death in 1968.
Yeah.
Actually, the archive, the papers of Le Corbusier were still a mess, no? Had not been ordered, not been cataloged as we know them today, and that we can actually consult them and study them by going to Paris. So very early, already in the mid-70s, we have started to work on the Corbusier. And recently, in the last years, I don't know whether it was in 2017 or 2018, you also worked on Eileen Gray. It was an acquaintance of Le Corbusier, also a friend, I imagine, because I don't know, well, but Le Corbusier worked for her because she painted some of the murals, no? Inside this famous villa, which is the Villa 2000. It's called Villa, I've never known why it's called like this. It's a number, it's a villa.
E1027.
Yes, E1027, I don't know why, but then you may.
I'll explain if you want. It's the initials of Eileen Gray and her friend Jean Badevisi. So E is Eileen, and then 10 is J for Jean, 2 is B for Badevisi, and Gray is 7.
Right.
So it's her initials surrounding his.
E1027, which is actually located very, very close to Le Corbusier Cabanon, Brune, where actually the Le Corbusier was found facing a very nice place, a beach, no? Beach. In the Mediterranean, the south of France, where Le Corbusier was found dead on August 1965. So it's the place where Le Corbusier spent his last years during the summer, no? In the Cabanon, very close to Eileen Gray villa, and I really recommend those of you who haven't visited this place to go, because today it's visitable in fact. Yes, and also Tim Benton has a remarkable activity as a teacher, an educator. He has taught many years, decades for the Open University, at the Open University, and then he has continued to do so in other places like Williams College, and also in the US, at the Barbara School in New York, at Lausanne, the EFL, and also more recently at the Architectural Association. I don't remember what you're still teaching. Yes, at the Architectural Association in London. So the last point, and then I will finish this introduction, but I want really to highlight this last point, because I'm particularly interested in this. I want to focus on is Benton's role in expanding and sharing knowledge about architecture through mass media and mass education. In fact, Benton was course team leader for the Open University for a module, a particular course that was called A305, History of Architecture and Design between 1890 to 1939. And this module can be considered a sort of landmark in the development of design history, architectural history, having a profound effect on the study of this discipline in Britain, and helping to shape the discipline and also to make it recognizable within the academic field. So in the 70s and in the 80s. So this course was made of films, actually, not in a time, at a time where internet was, of course, non-existent, was made of films that were aired on the BBC television, so anyone could watch them. By the way, for those who are interested in these films can be watched actually as a playlist made available by the Canadian Centre for Architecture, which is based in Montreal, as you know, which in 2018 actually organized an entire exhibition dedicated to this course. And this, of course, this exhibition is called "The University is Now on Air, Broadcasting Modern Architecture." So the course, by the way, another interesting thing is that this course was exhibited at the Venice Art Biennale in 1976, long before the organization of the exhibition by the CCA. So 6 of the TV programs at that time, in 1976, were translated into Italian, and then they were broadcasted on Italian television, so on the Italian television. So probably there's still the possibility to retrieve these materials if you go on Rai Play or okay. So there is also an Italian version of this lecture, which is really interesting. So a brief detour, of course, how was it possible, all this system of diffusing and broadcasting architecture was possible because actually it was possible within the frame of the Open University that had been founded in 1969 in Milton Keynes, which was actually a key experiment in distance and adult education, and part also of the socially progressive programs reforms of the Labour Party between 1964 and 1970, something very different from the times we are living now. So in the full swing of the so-called welfare state, which now practically disappeared at this time. So through these courses, such the course that he was leading, the Open University extended higher education beyond the typical class of students by using media as a tool to transform production and transmission of knowledge. So the course was held between 1975 and 82, and was not only made by films, but also by correspondence, by books, publications. And there was also a system of local and regional centers for diffusion with tutors. No, you have to think that there was no internet at the time. So all students scattered in all the country could actually refer to these centers in order to learn.
They could meet their tutor.
Yeah, and they could meet the tutors that were scattered all over the country. Okay, so I'm not saying anything more because otherwise we don't start. So although I have already some notion of the things that you would tell us today, I prefer to keep all the necessary surprise and suspense, so I won't say more, and gladly leave the floor to you. Okay.
Thank you, Michela. Thank you, and thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be in Torino. I've been several times before, but mostly just for a day or two. Can you hear me at the back? Can you hear? Okay, good. So I'm going to start with a little introduction, a preface, if you like. Le Corbusier once said famously, une maison est une machine à habiter. A house is a machine for living in. And this was considered a very scandalous thing to say. It's been held against him, and many, many people have used this to suggest that Le Corbusier was a functionist. But if we think about it, how can this statement not possibly be true? It must be true. A house is a structure with certain moving parts whose function is to be lived in. So far, so good. He doesn't say a home is a machine. He doesn't say a house is only a machine. It's what in rhetoric is called a partial definition. So you might have, for example, an English racist might say, English people are white. Well, quite a lot of English people are white, but a third of the population are not white. Okay. So it's used in arguments. And what we can draw from this is, Le Corbusier also said, the house is a snail's shell. So the house should fit the owner like the shell of a snail. Okay. And so we know a house is much more than bricks and mortar. It's a place where you dream, where you imagine, where you feel comfortable, where you make love, where you have children, where you bring up children, so where you might have a garden, where you might have a view from your window. A house is many more things than a machine. And we can draw from that the generalization that architecture is not just physical. Architecture is spiritual. Okay, it's imaginary. It's to do with the imagination. So that's the beginning of my talk. This is what we're going to talk about, which is what goes beyond the physical. So Charles Perriand, e mi dispiace, parlerò in inglese perché se parlo in italiano sarà un imbarazzo per me e per voi. Okay, Charles Perriand, newly employed by Le Corbusier in 1928, the Charles Perriand, well-known designer and so forth, who worked with Le Corbusier, claimed that he had initiated her into the miracle of modern architecture by having her visit the Villa La Roche, which had just been completed in 1925. And in her autobiography, she says, it's not working. Okay. And about it, entering this space, she says, enveloped by cantatas by Johann Sebastian Bach, now you understand the title, Corbusier had plugged in the gramophone, she said, was like stepping into an unknown world, throbbing with music, in total communion with the whole. Le Corbusier had me well and truly hooked. That's what she said. So we might quibble at the detail here. I spend a lot of my time quibbling at detail. I'm a pedant. Almost all gramophones were still hand cranked in 1928. You wound them up. You didn't plug them into the wall. They were not electric. They were entirely acoustic. And there were very few recordings of choral music, such as Bach cantatas, in the catalogues by 1928, for reasons I'll explain a little bit later. But the point is made. The asceticism of modern architecture was meant to be mitigated by art, music, and books. Okay? It's not just the physical structure of the building, it's certainly not the furniture, it's art, music, and books. So I think we can all agree that modernism was created by intellectuals for aesthetes. In his lecture on the furniture adventure in Buenos Aires in October 1929, published in the book Précision in 1930, Le Corbusier classified unnecessary possessions, crockery, linen, hats, and shoes and clothes. And there you are in the picture. And he says, c'est tout, that's all. He argued for un seul corps de métier, a single craft, which is the mason. So the mason would leave the site with the cupboards and shelves built in, and he would install prefabricated, industrialized casiers, which are unit furniture, which would deal with all the problems of the hats and the coats and the glass and everything. The interior would be liberated from bibelots and furniture. It sounds austere. Is it really? Is it c'est tout? Is this all? No, because this freedom will be used to think. This is the interior of the church house, the Villa Church. It's the music pavilion, and here you can see the built-in elements and the 3 chairs that Corbusier designed with Charles Perriand and a table, and that's it. That's what you get in a Corbusier interior. This freedom would be used to think, to read, to look at paintings, sculptures, or photographs, or listen to music. I'm not going to, and this is what he says in French here, I'm not going to talk about books, paintings, and sculpture. That's another lecture, and that costs extra. But I am going to talk about music. So this is what Corbusier says, the interior, living in a house, is the world of the imagination. It's the world of the intellect. When Hannes Meyer, who had become the director of the Bauhaus in 1928, exhibited his minimalist interior at the Bauhaus in 1928, with its folding chairs and camp bed, absolutely minimum furniture, he includes a gramophone. Functionalism plus music. This interior was actually reconstructed by Arthur Rueg in the 100 Years of Swiss Design exhibition at the Museum für Gestaltung at Zurich. And Le Corbusier, in many of his drawings, even for working class housing, this is for a Citroën house, always exaggerating the space and everything, often included the piano. So he was the son of a musician and brother of a musician. Music was an important member of the arts for him. He also always added a library, I should add. Almost all his villas of the 1920s had a library at the top of the house, where the owner of the house would go and read and think in the evening. So many architects were musicians or worked to music. Erich Mendelssohn, one of the most important modern architects in Germany of the 1920s, signed this drawing that he gave to Frank Lloyd Wright in 1924, when Mendelssohn visited Frank Lloyd Wright. He signed this drawing that he gave Wright with the composition for 2 violins by Bach that he had been listening to when he did the drawing, that inspired the drawing. The music produces architecture. He was listening to a gramophone. He didn't do the drawing in a concert house. He was listening to a gramophone. What the photograph was to the work of art, in the age of mechanical reproduction, the gramophone was to live music. It could reproduce and mechanically multiply recordings of a unique performance. It could destroy the aura and class-based connotations of the concert hall, and it could democratize music. It was a revolution. Walter Benjamin, who wrote about photographs, should have written about the gramophone as well. Actually, he did a bit, but he should have included it in his article on photographs in the age of mechanical reproduction. It's gone. I lost it. There it is. Okay. Of course, the gramophone, invented by Emil Berliner in 1887 as a development of Edison's invention, the phonograph, was not the only or the best way of recording and playing back music. The piano roll, which transferred the player's movements to a perforated roll of paper or metal, reproduced the music with real hammers and strings in a real piano. The Pleyela mechanical piano, which you can see here, a French development of the piano, could reproduce piano music almost perfectly. And the musician could actually make tiny corrections to get exactly the right effect. In the magazine L'Esprit Nouveau, which was the magazine that Le Corbusier edited with his friend Amédée Ozenfant in 1920, Le Corbusier's brother Albert Jeanneret, of course Le Corbusier's real name was Charles-Édouard Jeanneret, Albert Jeanneret wrote the promotional text for Pleyela, which you see here, which appeared frequently in the magazine. Not only could this machine produce, and I quote Albert, all existing pianistic formulae, but it could also go beyond what was humanly possible, reproducing 30 or 40 fingers simultaneously. Music will be composed for the Pleyela, he wrote. No wonder that Stravinsky was so keen on it and composed or adapted his music for the piano roll. But a Pleyela costs thousands of pounds, euros, whatever you want to think of, in today's money. This was the same cost, it was more expensive than a piano. The practical solution was the gramophone. HMV, his master's voice, is one of the main producers of gramophones in England and America, and also actually in Europe. Excuse me. There were basically 3 kinds of gramophone that you can see here, from the bottom to the top. in decreasing quality of sound. The pedestal, huge piece of furniture with very heavy mahogany, I'll explain how it works in a moment. The pedestal, which is the one in the middle, and the tabletop and portable. Okay. These all have different qualities, but the best ones are the heaviest ones. Unlike the human ear, which converts the vibrations of the eardrum into electrical signals, the early gramophone is an entirely acoustic device. It's just like a trumpet or a violin. Vibrations of a tiny steel needle attached to a diaphragm, the sound box, it's called the sound box, are amplified by a horn, just physically by the shape of a horn. And the early gramophones had, I think I've got one. Yeah, the early gramophones had a horn, like a trumpet, attached directly to the arm. So that's the only amplification, is the geometry of the horn. Just like a trumpet. The trumpet player makes a sound and it's amplified by the shape. Later on, these trumpets, because they were not popular, the trumpets, because they made a very brash sound, and it didn't look like something that you wanted necessarily to have in your living room, were turned into pieces of furniture like this, where the horn, you can see the arm is actually part of like a trumpet, and it goes down, and there's a folded tube, like a folded horn inside the box. And you can control the volume with these two doors. If you close the doors, it's more quiet. If you open the doors, it's louder. This generally means that size is good. The bigger and denser, heavier the material of the horn, the better and louder the sound. Caruso's sketch, this also applies to the recording process. If the recording process was a noise, it goes down a horn, is focused in the horn, and then agitates the needle that cuts into the wax. Originally it was shellac, that is then the recording instrument. So the bigger the sound, the closer you can get to the horn, the better. So this is Caruso, the famous Italian singer, shouting down the horn and recording his arias. And this is a cartoon by Caruso himself, and on the wall he has a little sketch of his master's voice. The little dog Nipper in Francis Barrow's famous painting, listening to his master's voice. The early recordings required loud sound close to the recording horn to impress the vibrations onto the recording disc. Now, Laszlo Molinari, who is one of the teachers of the Bauhaus and wrote some very important books, he was a fundamental theorist for the development of modern architecture. In his book, Von Material to Architecture, which I hope a book that you all know, if not, you should study it immediately, 1928, he said, he actually gave a picture of Caruso's high C. This wiggly line is the line of the high C in Caruso's aria. So you could see it, but you couldn't really hear it on the discs of the day, because although a high C is actually within the range of the medium, most of the atmosphere and timbre of the voice was lost. Now we'll get to try and play you. See if this works. Let's just see if this works.
La gente paga e rivermuore qua perché si devora colombina ride fagliato ognuno applaudirà tramo della
Thank you. So that's the typical sound of the 1920s and 30s gramophone. And actually, the acoustic gramophone went on into the 50s. I was born in 1945, and my parents had an acoustic gramophone. And it was great because you could take it outside and play it on the lawn. You know, you could take it anywhere with you, wind it up, and it would play. But that was the sound, the kind of sound that you got from it. Okay, that was that. What's it doing now? It's doing something strange. Here we go. Okay. So pedestal models, like the gentleman here sitting down, produced the best sound because it was a large tube, a large horn that made the sound come out of the furniture. Tabletop versions like this one, the algraphone, were nearly as good and smaller, and you could fit them into your interior better. But here's the rub. These are large pieces of furniture. This is exactly what the modern architects were trying to get rid of. So there's a problem. Here's a revolution, a modern revolution in the reproduction of sound, but it produced a problem for the architects. And they were very expensive. A pedestal model, like the one in here, would cost £1,000 in today's money, or €1,000, if you like. And a tabletop, several hundred euros in today's money. But all lectures are work in progress. I've done this lecture once before. I'll probably do it again sometime, and it's going to develop. But here I launch a challenge for you to find the hidden gramophone in the modern interior. Okay. Mendelssohn, Erich Mendelssohn, who we talked about, who worked to drawing, to music, who wrote the names of the things he was listening to on some of his drawings, certainly had a gramophone. But where is the gramophone in his house, in the house he designed in 1929 on the Rupenhorn in Berlin? Where did Gropius, who was married to the former wife of Mahler, the great Austrian composer, where did he have his gramophone? He certainly had a gramophone. Where is it? In his house in the Bauhaus at Dessau. Paul Klee, who was a semi-professional musician, he played in a quartet. He certainly had a gramophone. Where is it? In his house. And you can go through, and I've been through, and I'm not going to bore you with too many examples, but hundreds and hundreds of images of modern interiors in the famous collections of images of modern interiors. For example, Hans Müller-Wulkau, Die Deutsche Wohnung der Gegenwart, which is a so-called blue book, which is just pictures of interiors. Or Gustav Platz, Innenräume der Gegenwart, which is another book with 500 pages with a text, but it also has mostly pictures. And I've been through all of these. I cannot find a single gramophone. You can find pianos, you can find a violin sitting in a corner, not a single gramophone. Because the gramophone, the physical structure of the gramophone, was a problem for the modern architecture. Now, I think it's quite interesting for you to think about, are the problems of this kind in Europe, for example, are the things that people need now, do they create a problem for architecture? I don't know, that's for you to think about. So in his, yes, I showed you just some examples. These are just some examples here. Now in this, which was an exhibition that Gropius and Breuer designed in Paris in 1931, Gropius did include a radio. Okay, this is a radio. And in fact, there's a whole history of the design of radios trying to make them acceptable to modernism, to modernize the radio and stop it being like a piece of furniture with veneer and so forth. For example, just to give an English example, This is a radio designed by the English architect Wells Coates in 1934, in which he does a very beautiful job of designing the whole radio around the shape of the loudspeaker. Okay, and this ring here is where you do the tuning. So it's a kind of very rational, modern design, and it's made of bakelite. So it's not made of veneered wood. But that again is another story. In fact, Adrian Forty, a very good English art historian, has written a whole book about modern radios. In the 1930s, you begin to get the marriage between the radio and the gramophone, because the radio had an electrical amplifier. The sound comes into a radio in electrical form, and it's amplified with valves and other things, and the sound is put out by a loudspeaker. So some people have the idea, well, why don't we find a way of turning the vibrations in the needle into electrical signals, and then we can pass that to the amplifier in the radio, and we will have a sound, better quality sound. So here, for example, on the left top, this is a typical sound box. Okay, this is what originally was used to pick up the sound. It's just the needle that goes into the middle of a reception area, which provides the first amplification, and then that goes down the tube and is amplified visually. But by 1927, this is an example from 1928, this is turned into an electrical pickup. But because of the way invention works, they didn't think of miniaturizing it. Nowadays, a pickup on a gramophone is a little thing like this, you know, sometimes very small. But here it uses the same structure entirely as the sound box, and it has two little coils that turn the vibration into electric current, very small electric current, and then that is then amplified. So by the 1930s, the radiogram, with sometimes with a record auto changer, you could put a stack of 5 or 6 records and it would change them one after the other, was becoming fashionable, using the amplifier of the radio to convert the signals from the electrical pickup, which were becoming available after 1927. But once again, these were large and expensive and unacceptable to the modernist interior. So mechanically revolutionary, these, let's make sure, yes, these objects, from the point of view of the modern architect, belong to a different world. And in fact, a process which is going to become extremely important in terms of the whole design of the interior, which is the shifting of attention from the fireplace. The French word for a home is le foyer, the fireplace. The attention begins to shift from the foyer to the radiogram or radio, where people sit around and listen, and then eventually to the television. This is one of the major ground shifts in interior design that happens, that starts in the 1930s and goes on into the 60s and 70s. Okay, but where it happens is in the traditional eclectic interior. So here, this advertisement for Victrola shows people sitting around a radiogram. This is not a modern interior. Okay. So, they keep disappearing. I keep losing they won't do that. I see, okay, well. So the architectural problem of the gramophone was where to put it. Where do you put your gramophone? Do you hide it in a cupboard or drawer or build it in, or do you miniaturize it? We're going to look at all these options. In the house, Le Corbusier designed for his brother, Albert Jeanneret, a musician, Albert Jeanneret, we've looked at, the person who did the article about the École. Le Corbusier designed a special shelf, and you could see it here in the living room of the Jeanneret house, which is now where the Fondation Le Corbusier is kept. This strange shelf that goes down like that. And this was designed to house his gramophone. So you can just see it here just see the edge of the gramophone in this concrete structure. So Le Corbusier designed it in, okay? Being an architect, you know, he wanted to design it in, and he also designed in a rack for the records, which you can just see behind. This is the detail of the gramophone. Expensive tabletop gramophone, perhaps the Columbia Graphanola 20A. But Le Corbusier's theory of the decorative arts made it a problem to include any pieces of furniture of this kind. In 1925, he wrote a book called Decorative Arts of Today. In fact, it was a series of articles which he wrote in 1924, and they were written before the 1925 exhibition of Les Arts Décoratifs et Industriels Modernes, which was held in 1925 in Paris. Decorative and industrial modern arts. And Le Corbusier's articles in his book was the argument is that you should just get rid of this whole category. There shouldn't be decorative artists. The decorative artist of today is undecorated. So what you should do is you should have what is provided by industry. And here you see it. This is Amédée Ozenfant's studio, which he designed. And they're just some cheap chairs. The chairs are made by Tonnet. The Austrian firm Tonnet from the 1880s was producing Bentwood chairs. And one of these chairs, the number 19 chair, was the most produced chair of all time. It was found all over the world, in cafes and so forth. Le Corbusier says, that's what you want. You want the Tonnet chair, very cheap, perfectly good. If it breaks, you get another one, okay? And for, and so here, for example, in the bedroom of La Roche, who is a wealthy banker, he provides a metal bed and a metal table. But notice the place of art. So there's minimum functionalism and art. And of course, in the Ozenfant studio as well, there's art. So here in the Esprit Nouveau Pavilion in 1925, which he designed for the 1925 exhibition of decorative arts, Le Corbusier provided a housing cell. So this was a concrete building, which was meant to be stacked in apartment buildings called les immeubles villas. Okay, and the furniture that he provides for this cell was in fact Raoul Laroche's furniture. Okay, he borrowed Raoul Laroche's furniture with the Bentwood chairs and these leather armchairs. So what he says is, and this he takes from Adolf Loos, the Austrian designer and fashion journalist. He says, if you want something good, like if you want good quality shoes, or if you want a good quality armchair, you go to the craftsman who makes them. So if you want comfort, don't try and design a comfortable chair. Go to the shop that makes the best leather comfortable armchairs, which was actually in Paris, Maples. Maples was an English firm on the Tottenham Court Road that made furniture, and it had an offshoot in Paris. And so these leather armchairs, you just buy them, they're quite expensive, but they're very good, they're very comfortable, they're long-lasting. So that solves the problem of furniture. You don't design furniture. And here on the right is the casier, which he wanted to be industrialized. In fact, they never were, but the standard units where you could put things and so forth. Here we go. Okay. Now, the Irish designer, Eileen Gray, who, as Michele said, I've been working on for 10 years or so, she had a completely different approach. She was a real designer. Okay. This is E1027, this fellow with this beautiful view in the Mediterranean. It's just near Monte Carlo. She designed furniture for specific, she would call it gestures, for specific places and functions. So this is a corner of E1027, which has a very small bed And it has a fitment behind it, which contains everything that you need for a siesta or even to spend the night. It has cupboards with a kettle, electric kettle. It was Anglo-Irish, so she needed to make tea. There's a kettle, there's a teapot, there are cups and saucers, there's a light which has a blue light and a white light for reading and a blue light when you're going to sleep. And the cupboard at the top, which has a moustiquaire, a mosquito netting in it. It comes out and runs on a cable. So everything that you need in this space, she designs for, to the point of having a special table that cantilevers out and swings round with a book stand so that you could read in bed. This is the absolute opposite of Le Corbusier or Marsan or Breuer or Gropius or any of the modernists. You design for particular living purposes. And if you look at the living room here, this is the living room of B1027, there are different chairs which all express different functions. There's the so-called Michelin chair, here, the very, very comfortable chair where you can sit and so forth. There's the Transat chair, which is designed to imitate a deck chair on an ocean liner. And then there's a huge pouf, which is 2 meters 50 square, where after lunch, people could sort of flop down. After a few glasses of wine, they could flop down and take a siesta. So all the different functions are catered for. And so it's not surprising, this is my photograph of the intro. It's not surprising that she also designed, as you can see, a special piece of furniture for the gramophone. Okay. And this is it here. Okay. So she took Badovisi's gramophone and designed a piece of furniture around it and made it mobile, because the whole point of these gramophones, as I say, that you didn't need to plug them in, but you could wheel it out onto the terrace and play music, and then down onto the balcony, I'm sorry, and then down on the terrace below, people would dance. Badovisi called them the piece of the dance, or dance tracks. So this is an almost unique example of an architect and designer designing for the gramophone. That's why I'm showing it to you. This is not generally what happened, but it happened because Eileen Gray approached every problem, and including the problem of how you stack your discs. Now, most architects simply provide a shelf with vertical dividers. She designed that's the gramophone with the wind-up handle, spare needles, HMV. Okay. She designed Bakelite discs, which went into a cupboard with celluloid behind. Each one would hold a gramophone record. So again, she's approached the problem of the gramophone and where to store it, where to store the records from a design point of view. This is virtually unique. This is not what modern architects do. Another modern designer with Art Deco roots was Charlotte Perriand, we've mentioned before. Charlotte Perriand graduated in the School of Art Decorative. He was the star pupil of the year of 1926. And she was trained as an Art Deco designer. Her first pieces are all Art Deco. And she designed this interior for the apartment, which is actually a converted photographic studio, with pieces of furniture that her long-suffering English husband paid for, which was also exhibited in 1927. And here, if you notice, there is a gramophone built in. I think I've got a detail of it. Yes. So this is the gramophone. Now what she's done is she's taken it out of its box, but it's still an acoustic gramophone. So the sound comes out actually from the side. The sound still goes down the arm and into a tube like a trumpet, which is made of wood, and comes out of the side. It's not an electric gramophone. And she designed the racks for the records. This is a reconstruction done by Arthur Rueg, who I mentioned before, done for a recent exhibition of Charlotte Perriand. And you can see it still has the handle for winding it up to make it work. So this is the designer tackling the problem a bit, you know, at least avoiding having a big mahogany box with a gramophone in it. She also made designs for the gramophone. This is a pickup with the record shelves cantilevered out on either side. And you might think it was a loudspeaker, but it isn't. It's just the horn, the pelted horn that comes out. She doesn't draw the handle, but there would have been a handle as well. That's another piece she designed for a typewriter. Now, in 1927, the gallery, because there was a collection of paintings in the La Roche house, the radiators in the gallery froze and exploded. So there was a flood, and it all had to be redesigned. And this was one of Charlotte Perriand's first jobs, and she redesigned the interior in various ways. And one of the things she did, in the space, there's a ramp. In the space underneath the ramp, she did a number of drawings in which she tried to build in a gramophone. So this shape that you see there is for a gramophone. And then you can see there's a rack for gramophone records. In fact, in the end, it didn't happen. I don't know for what reason, but it didn't happen. So somewhere the gramophone would have been a gramophone, just an ordinary box. So that's the standard sort of quality tabletop gramophone. The portable gramophone has a different history because it became a symbol of youth, for open air living, for dancing, and so forth. Here are a group of Bauhaus students with a portable gramophone. So the portable gramophone develops a new aura as a symbol of youth and freedom. Oh, sorry, I've been in the wrong direction. There you go. And it becomes an icon. This is a painting of a gramophone. Literally an icon. And when Mark Stan did a design, this was an installation he did with his People of Steel furniture, he shows these young women, well, sporty young women, with a large carpeted area where they're going to perhaps do their gymnastics, or we're not quite sure what they're going to do, and there is a gramophone. So the portable gramophone takes on a completely different anti-bourgeois connotation in this time. I'm trying to stick to my text because if not, I'll go on too long, and then I'll miss my flight. Okay. And here, for example, in the Doldertal apartments, these are a block of flats designed by Marcel Breuer and Alfred Roth, and where Siegfried Gideon lived. They probably had a tabletop or gramophone somewhere in the apartment. You don't see it, but what you see is the portable gramophone, which is outside on the terrace, because that's where you would play your songs, your jazz, your even dance music or whatever in the open air. This is a very different kind of thing culturally. Now, I mentioned that there was a process of electrification going on, and the first place that this happens is in the electrical recordings. So you could make much better quality recordings if you had a microphone which turned the sound into electrical signals. You amplify those signals, and then you use those signals to transfer to vibrations to make the recording, not least because you could have several microphones. So for the first time, you could record an orchestra. You'd have 15 different microphones, and they would all pick up different sounds. Okay. The problem with sound is, it sounds like light, it falls off in a square root of the, in a square of distance. Okay. So the further away something is, very quickly the sound falls away in body. So this was going on, and by 1928, all the big record companies had electrical recordings, but they were still being played back on acoustic gramophones, except in certain very professional situations. This is the English architect Wells Coates again. There was a building called Broadcasting House that was built in 1934, 1932, which was the center of the BBC. A brand new building with different studios. It was a very interesting building. And Wells Coates designed this special effects studio gallery. It's called a gallery. So production of plays in those days, you know, they have plays on the radio, were done live. So what happened was you would have the actors in one studio, in a soundproof studio, with their scripts, reading their lines. And then in a sound effects studio, these sounds would be made simultaneously and mixed in to reflect what was going on. So here, for example, in a special effects studio, there were steps. You can't see them here, but there were steps, so you could have people walking up and down. There were doors that opened. This table has 9 different surfaces that you could use for scratching and making different sounds. There's a water tank at the bottom. You can make water sounds for a river or something like that, and so forth. And in the gallery, you had a bank of turntables with lots of special effect discs, where you could reproduce the sound of locomotives, you could reproduce the sound of cars and traffic, you could reproduce the sound of rain, you could produce the sound of open air, the kind of the effect of the open air, as opposed to the soundproof situation in the recording studio. And these turntables are electric. So here, in this very specialized thing, these turntables, these arms, you can see, are not amplifying their sound. They're just carrying the pickup, which is an electrical pickup, and that is being amplified and then mixed in with a big control table with lots of knobs, where you can mix all the sounds in live. But this is an exception. Okay. Now, there's an interesting example of the problem, if you like, of where to put the gramophone, in the apartment of Charles de Bestegui. He was a very rich man who had a collection of paintings. In fact, his brother had an even better collection of paintings. But he employed Le Corbusier to design an apartment on the top of a building in the Champs-Élysées. And this decor was all actually done by somebody else. Le Corbusier did the basic design, and then somebody else did it. But in this room, there is a wall. This is the culture wall. So it has books, and it has the gramophone. Where's the gramophone? Now, you might think that this circular thing there is a loudspeaker. It isn't, in fact, because the gramophone is this drawer here on the left. And you can see in the drawing that it pulls out, and there's a gramophone inside, an acoustic gramophone inside. You can see it better there. Come on. Okay. But Bestegui was actually also rather old-fashioned in some ways. And one of the things that he had, just check this, was the theatrophone. Okay, the theatrophone. This was a system which was introduced in the 1880s, whereby wealthy subscribers, Marcel Proust was one of those subscribers, could listen to a performance live at the opera or at a theatre, which was distributed by the telephone in stereo. Okay, so the quality was absolutely terrible, but you could listen to whatever was on at the opera or the Comédie Française or anything in this thing. And the arrival of radio meant that the Compagnie de Theatrophone folded in 1932, which was more or less the date of the apartment that Bestegui finished. But de Bestegui still had an example of this. So the third and final alternative was miniaturization. Now, the route to the miniaturization that goes, for example, to the Manjadiski of the 1950s, with the little EP records and the thing that you carried around like this and so forth, is a long road. There's the development of the transistor, there's the development of the long playing record with much finer recordings and grooves, proper amplification of the sound, and so forth. And this takes a long time. But already in the 1920s, there is a new development. Yes, sorry, I should have shown you this. There you go backwards. This is women listening to the theatrophone in stereo. So in a book that Corbusier wrote in 1925 called London and Madrid, he advertises the Mickey phone. The Mickey phone was a gramophone. Okay, doesn't look like it. It's a little thing like this. It was patented by two Hungarians, the Bach brothers, and manufactured by the Payal watchmaking firm in Geneva. Okay. There it is, the Mickey phone. The Bach system. Okay, there's the Mickey phone. It was extremely successful. It sold 180,000 copies in 5 years in Europe and America. Okay. And Miss Danguet, the great star singer of the French concert hall, or the French vaudeville, actually wrote a song about the Mickey phone, which was also a very popular song. So how does it work? Well, it opens up and it has a little platter that turns. There's a thing that you wind up, and it has a sound box with the amplifier is just a Bakelite box attached to the sound box. And there it is, play. And I'm going to show you, if I can, one of the presenters at the Smithsonian, where they have one of these, who shows how it works. Let's see if this is going to work. Let's see if it works. A miracle of modern technology. The Corbusier wrote, everything changes. The furniture produced by the cabinet maker and metal worker gives way to the product of a watchmaker with a watchmaker's precision. So it's a miracle of modernity. But you can see it's not very practical. Okay. And there were other attempts to miniaturize the gramophone, but we have to await the Sony Walkman and the digitization of music to achieve the modernist dream of personalized portable music. Nevertheless, the portable gramophone, I think we'll have no, hang on. Yes, the portable gramophone, wind-up gramophone, continued into the 1950s to generate conviviality, pleasure, and reflection at home and on the move. Thank you.
questions?
Se volete mettere domande in italiano posso, se è più facile.
Most of them speak English
Okay.
only, I think.
Good, good.
We had a really short time to look at the question because the
Yeah.
presenter has to Philip Torino, so
Yeah.
within 15 minutes, so we have to be really short.
Very short.
Come on, don't be shy.
Yeah. I mean, did you know all this? As I say, I think there's a methodological point, which is something that I like to work a lot about, the contradiction in architecture. When one thing pushes in one direction, and then it finds an obstacle in the inherent nature of the architectural problem. And, you know, there are many, many aspects of modernism, the development of modern architecture from the 1920s until the 1930s, which are kind of swept under the carpet, which are not discussed because they don't fit the idea. And this is one of them, the gramophone.
Shows also how this kind of stuff indicates topics of designing. Like for now, for example, it was but in my opinion, like one element can be the television, no? So for example, like if you look at some pictures of the really interesting architecture, like of interiors, like I don't know, in some really posh shapes, like we design, you never saw televisions in houses, but probably so. Use it or not, or maybe they are hiding really well. So that was telling me, like, for example, plugs for electricity, like stove, you know, for example, sometimes I don't know, really well-designed interior doesn't have just have to customize this kind of stuff. But I don't know, also maybe in your opinion, like also other, like in your products, like for example, if you want to and the chance to think about maybe not that kind of elements, but also more technical elements that maybe are influencing a lot the space there. Also, how to read a space because they like it was interesting, like looking at this kind of picture and this kind of also as an object on the ground, like how was it tamed, but then I don't really the drawing of Corbusier the one in the highlight, you know, in the wall, how the space was designed in that kind of modern style, but this the sketch of the gramophone was like a really like classical shape, and like it was really interesting.
The question is, if you consider that gramophone brought the sound and the music as an art to the ordinary house for the first time, do you think it is the most important fact that changes the architecture in a way, the art of the new sounds and the music that comes to everyday houses, or this new technology that brings the wonder of everyday technology that can be experienced by normal people? Is it the art that shapes the architecture, or is it the technology of recording and bringing the sounds to, maybe cutting off some part of the memory and bringing it to another moment in the future?
It's very interesting. I mean, I think one of the defining factors in the development of recorded music is actually the failings of the recording and playback process. The fact that loud sounds were good. So one of the things of the gramophone was that it spread jazz music and Dixieland and sort of small band music with trumpets and loud instruments outside the cellars where it was played. So jazz music began in America and sort of in the deep south and so forth, and then it comes to Paris and it comes to other places, but it's a very minority thing. Suddenly you have these records which are being bought by everybody, and it also made stars of some of the singers. You know, Caruso was and then Nelly Melba and many other singers became pop stars, you know, through the sale of records. And often it was just the sale of arias. They just sang arias because you couldn't reproduce the whole opera. And so I think this was a failing of the recording system, but it had a huge influence on culture and on democratization of culture, genuine democratization of culture. The people in Naples all knew all the Verdi arias because of the gramophone. They didn't go to the opera. You know, they knew because of the record. And so I think that's very important. I think the role of the question of the passage of the aesthetic of music and architecture is a very big question. I remember when I did my interview for the Open University, one of the questions I was asked by the professor of music was, what did I think the relationship of music to architecture was? And I started off on a long explanation about proportion and the relationship between harmonic ratios in architecture and harmonic ratios in music. And that wasn't his thing. He was interested in the fact that when he played the organ in different churches, they sounded different. That was what his point was. You know, I think the relationship between, I mean, one of the things, for example, about modern architecture that people don't talk about is that the acoustic of most interiors is terrible. Terrible reverberation. Okay. People write about the Villa La Roche, for example, in terms of diaphanous surfaces, you know, things like that. When you go there, you know it's a concrete building because of the sound of your feet. You know that the big wall is not a diaphanous wall, it's a thick wall that radiates cold on your cheek as you go up the stairs. You know? So the five senses have been played down in the critique of architecture and in the design of architecture. And what's interesting, in the 1930s, architects begin to change, including Le Corbusier. And he starts insulating his walls, he starts using plywood. I'm sorry, that's my phone. It's in there. Can you just turn it? Can you turn it? No. It's my wife, whether I'm touching the phone. I don't know. It's finished. Yeah, so I mean, the question of music and the sound of music, to play the piano in most Le Corbusier interiors, in most modern interiors of the 1920s, would be a torment for a musician, because the sound is so reverberant. And in fact, where Albert Jeanneret, Le Corbusier's brother, had his piano, was actually in a room at the bottom where he was much better insulated and there was better acoustic. He wouldn't have wanted to play the piano in his beautiful living room. I don't know whether that answers your question.
One big question.
One more.
And then. Yeah, maybe a remark. Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Okay, then.
No. Now, what probably would connect what Carlos said before, that was really interesting to see all these images of these periods of artists that were represented as a lived in, you know, so which is not very frequent, especially in the first generation of the book about modern architecture, where interiors were not even shown, or if they were shown, they were shown as completely free from any kind of sign of life, you know, no? So there is this, I think since that book that was published in 1969, 1970 by Philippe Dudon on Pessac, it was entitled like the lived-in architecture.
Mm.
There has been a research, not a research, but a new interest in looking at modernism and modern architecture, also from the point of view of living spaces, no?
Of course.
Which is much more interesting. And even I noticed a recent publication, maybe, yes, which is about the apartment by living by the Corbusier.
Sure.
It's called, I think, living lives of an apartment
Mm.
by someone called
Graf, who did the he did the restoration of it.
Right. So I think there might be other examples.
Sure.
No? Also in the school, there has been some research on that, not specifically on modern, generation of modern architecture, but more on the post-war architecture. So these kinds of buildings were seen not only from the point of view of the designer, but also from the point of view of the user. And how these spaces were transformed and changed by users, and also how they can also reveal some contradictions between, the intentions of the architect and the ways in which the spaces were lived by users.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge subject, and it includes questions of light, for example. The use of big windows is a huge problem in many places.
Yeah.
But the photographs never show them, because if you have a photograph, everybody knows that, the huge contrast difference between the window and the interior. So you always get just a little bit of the window and you show the interior. And so many of these things, yes, absolutely do need looking at. But the interesting architects like Le Corbusier himself, Breuer, Rietveld, all changed their practice in the 1930s. And if you look at the house Le Sextant that Corbusier designed in 1935, or if you look at the little Petite Maison de Weekend he did also in 1935, they're completely different. They use vaults to soften the sound, they use plywood surfaces, they use brick, and they're completely different. So yes, I mean, there is a huge criticism of 1920s modernism that needs to be made. But you have to remember that Le Corbusier thought of himself as a monk. And he talked about buildings as cells, and it was in an important context, which was the dramatic need to provide cheap housing for millions of people. So there was a kind of argument that you would use industrialization, in fact, they never really did, but you would use industrialization to make these very simple spaces, which were better than the slums that people were living in before, but they would have to adapt to a new way of living. And Le Corbusier writes a lot about learning to live in a new way. Now, we might say this is typical architecture, dominating people and men, women, all that comes into it as well. And it's true. But there was this context, which is important.
And this lecture here, and thank you so much for this lecture. It was very amazing and enlightening, and I think it will be very useful for the students to understand that you can also take this and use it in your project, use it as a way to look at architecture in a different kind of way. So I think it was very useful for the students, and we thank you very much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Good. Everything works all right?
Amazing.
Everything.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. No.